Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today is the 10th day of January 2023. Already 10 days have gone by, almost here in the month of January. And I wanted to share with you a particular book that I'm going to be reading out of is Amusing Ourselves to Death. This was written back in 1985 by a gentleman named Neil Postman. Um, Unfortunately, Neil Postman is no longer alive today. This is a groundbreaking work that was taking place with him. Um, so what I'm going to do is read some information here from it, and hopefully you enjoy it because frankly we've changed quite a bit. So this is going to be reading from the foreword. Again, my channel is Discerning What is True. I am on Facebook. I am actually also on YouTube and Odyssey. So this is the first. This was written in 1985. This is when I was 25 years old, and the foreword actually reiterates what's happened here. So the foreword says, "We were keeping our eye on 1984 when the year came and the prophecy didn't. Thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves, the roots a liberal democracy had held. Wherever else the terror had happened, we at least had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. But we've forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling book called Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Contrary to common belief, and even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warned that we will be overcome by external imposed oppression, but in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacity to think. My, oh my, where are we at today? Think about it. Yes, MTV was probably already going, I think actually in the early 1980s. And no, it wasn't even, as far as I know, it was not required reading in any of my college classes. I don't think it was even required in any of my high school classes, except maybe George Orwell, but no one did the Huxley book. But anyway, what Orwell feared was those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, or there would be no one who wanted to read one. That's where we're at, folks. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevancy. You see, it's all over the place, but no one knows how to discern it. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture, preoccupied with some equivalent of the feelies, the orgies, and the centrifuge bumble puppet, as Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited. The civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny fail to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. In 1984, Huxley had people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell's feared that what we have will ruin us. Huxley feared what we love will ruin us. This book is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right. The medium is the metaphor. At different times in our history, different cities have been the focal point of a radiating American spirit. In the late 18th century, for example, Boston was the center of political radicalism. And a night a shot heard around the world, a shot that could not have been fired any other place but the suburbs of Boston. As a report, all Americans, including Virginians, became Bostonians at heart. In the mid-19th century, New York became the symbol of the idea of a melting pot of America, or at least a non-English one, as the wretched refugees from all over the world disembarked at Ellis Island and spread over the land their strange languages and even stranger ways. In early 20th century Chicago, the city of big shoulders and heavy winds, came to symbolize the industrial energy and dynamicism of America. If there is a statue of Hog Busher somewhere in Chicago, then it stands as a reminder of the time when America was railroads, cattle, steel mills, entrepreneurial adventures. If there is no such statue, there ought to be, just as there is a statue of the Minuteman to recall the age of Boston, and the Statue of Liberty recalls the age of New York. Today, we must look to the city of Las Vegas, Nevada, as the metaphor of our national character and aspiration. It symbols a 30-foot high cardboard picture of a slot machine and chorus girls. For Las Vegas is a city entirely devoted to the idea of entertainment, and as such proclaims the spirit of a culture in which all public discourse increasingly takes the form of entertainment. Our politics, religion, news, athletes, education, and commerce have been transformed into congenial adjuncts of show business, largely without protest or even much popular notice. The result is that we are people on the verge of amusing ourselves to death. As I write this book, the President of the United States is a former Hollywood movie actor. That's right, Ronald Reagan. One of his principal challenges in 1984 was once a featured player on television's most glamorous show in the 1960s. That is to say, Astronaut. Naturally, a movie had been made about his extraterrestrial adventures. Former nominee George McGovern had hosted the popular television show Saturday Night Live. So has a candidate of more recent vintage, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Meanwhile, former President Richard Nixon, who once claimed he lost the election because he was sabotaged by makeup men, has offered Senator Edward Kennedy's advice on how to make a serious run for the presidency: lose 20 pounds. Although the Constitution makes no mention of it, it would appear that fat people are now effectively excluded from running for high political office. Probably bald people as well. Almost certainly, those whose looks are not significantly enhanced by the cosmetic art. Indeed, we may have reached a point where cosmetics has replaced ideology as the field of expertise over which a politician must have competent control. American journalists, i.e. the television newscasters, have not missed the point. Most spend more time with their hair dryers than with their scripts, with the result that they comprise the most glamorous groups of people this side of Las Vegas. Although the Federal Communication Act made no mention of this, those without camera appear are excluded from addressing the public about what is called the news of the day. Those with camera appeal can command salaries exceeding $1 million a year. American businessmen discovered long before the rest of us that the quality and usefulness of their goods are subordinate to the artifice of their display. That, in fact, half the principle of capitalism as praised by Adam Smith or condemned by Karl Marx are irrelevant. Even the Japanese are said to make better cars than Americans. Know that economics is less a science than a performing art, as Toyota yearly advertising budget confirms. Not long ago, I saw Billy Graham join with Shickley Green and Red Buttons and Diana Warwick, Milton Berle, and other theologians in a tribute to George Burns, who is celebrating himself for surviving 80 years to show business. The Reverend Graham exchanged one-liners with Burns about making preparation for eternity, although the Bible makes no mention of it. The Reverend Graham assured the audience that God loves those who make people laugh. It was an honest mistake. He merely mistaked NBC for God. Dr. Ruth, if you remember her, she was a psychologist who had a popular radio program and a nightclub act in which she informs her audience about sex and all of its infinite variety and language once reserved for the bedroom and street quarters. She's almost as entertaining as Reverend Billy Graham, and has been quoted as saying, "I don't start out to be funny, but if it comes out that way, I use it. If they call me an entertainer, I say that's great." When a professor teaches with a sense of humor, people walk away remembering. She did not say what they remember or of what use their remembering is, but she has a point. It's great to be an entertainer. Indeed, in America, God's favorites are those who possess both a talent and a format to amuse, whether they be preachers, athletes, entrepreneurs, politicians, teachers, or journalists. In America, the last amusing people are as professional and entertainers. Cultural watchers and warriors, those of the type who read books like this one, will know that the examples above are never aberrations, but in fact cliches. There's no shortage of critics who have observed and recorded the dissolution of public discourse in America and its conversions into art of show business. But most of them, I believe, have barely begun to tell the story of the origin and meaning of this descent into a vast triviality. Those who have written vigorously on the matter tell us, for example, that what is happening is the residue of a exhausted capitalism or the contrary. That it is the tasteless fruit of the maturing of capitalism, or that it is the neurotic aftermath of the age of Freud, or the repetition of our allowing God to perish, or that it all comes from the old standbys, greed and ambition. I have attended carefully to those explanations. I do not say there is nothing to learn from them. Marx, Freudians, Levi Strauss's, even creation sciences are not to be taken lightly. And in any case, I should be very surprised if the story I have to tell is anywhere near the whole truth. We are all, as Huxley said someplace, great abbreviations, meaning that none of us has the wit to know the whole truth. The time to tell if we believe we did, or an audience are so gullible as to accept it. But you will find an argument here that presumes a clearer grasp of the matter that many that have come before, its value such as it is, resides in its directness of the perspective, which had its origins in an observation made 2,300 years ago by Plato. It is an argument that fixes its attention on the forms of human conversation, postulates that how we are obliged to conduct such conversations will have the strongest possible influence on what ideas we can conveniently express, and what ideas are convenient to express inevitably become the important content of its culture. I use the word conversation metaphorically to refer not only to speech, but to all techniques and technologies that permit people of a particular culture to exchange messages. In this sense, all culture is conversation, or more precisely, a corporation of conversations, conducted in a variety of symbolic modes. Our attention here is on how forms of public discourse regulate and even dictate what kind of content can issue from such forms. To take a simple example of what this means, consider the primitive technology of smoke signals. What I do not know exactly what content was only carried in the smoke signals of American Indians, I can safely guess that it did not include philosophical arguments. Puffs of smoke are insufficiently complex to express ideas on the nature of existence, and even if they were not, a Cherokee philosopher would run short of either wood or blankets long before he reached his second axiom. You cannot use smoke to do philosophy. Its form excludes the content. To take an example closer to home, as I suggested earlier, it is implausible to imagine that anyone like our 27th president, the multi-chin, 300-pound William Howard Taft, could be put forward as a presidential candidate in today's world. The shape of a man's body is largely irrelevant to the shape of his ideas when he is addressing a public, in writing or on the radio, or for that matter, in smoke signals. But it is quite relevant on television. That is correct. The grossness of a 300-pound image, even a talking one, would easily overwhelm any logical or spiritual subtleties conveyed by speech. For on television, discourse is conducted largely through visual imagery. Correct. It's about how you look, how sway and how suave you are. You see, it's a way that actually seduces people, almost putting them in a spell. You see, and they themselves actually think that that's what is the politician. You see, the emergency the emergence of an image manager in the political arena and the committal decline of the speechwriter attest to the fact that television demands a deeper kind of content from other media. You cannot do political philosophy on television as forms works against the content. Yeah, it's very much so. As I read this part of the book last night of Edward Bernays, with propaganda, television changes the whole thing here. It's based upon little snippets, and that's what the media does. And then eventually, advertisement becomes a little snippet too. So it doesn't even really um, express the ideas of even a politician, so to speak. Or plus, people. I'm just telling you this. And it's not in the book. But I'm going to. People don't have the patience anymore. Also, they're not able to discern. They're not able to see what's going on because they've done flashes all the time with the television that causes people to they could be able there for only a few seconds and then have to break. You know what I'm saying? It causes issues because they're not able to they can't think on their own. You cannot do political philosophy until it's forward marks against the content. Okay, to give still another example on a more complexity, the information, the content, or if you will, the stuff that makes up what is called the news of the day could not exist in a world that lacked the media to give it expression. I do not mean that things like fires, wars, murders, and love affairs did not ever always happen in places all over the world. I mean that lacking of a technology to advertise them, people could not attend to them, could not include them in their daily business, you see. While people talk about it when they're drinking water, having coffee, their 10-minute break. It's no longer, it's about these little snippets. It has nothing to do with anything of any depth anymore. Such information simply could not exist as part of the content of culture. This idea that there is a content called the news of the day was entirely created by the telegraph and since amplified by newer media, which make it possible to move decontextualization information over vast spaces of incredible speed. The news of the day is just a figment of our technological imagination. It is quite precisely a media event. We attend to fragments of events from all over the world because we have multiple media whose forms are well suited to fragmented conversation. Culture without speed of light media, that is, let us say, cultures in which smoke signals are the most efficient space conquering tool available, do not have news of the day. Without a medium to create its form, the news of the day does not exist, you see. To say it then is as plain as I can, this book is an inquiry into and lamentation about the most significant American cultural fact of the second half of the 20th century. The age of typography, that is writing, that is, and the ascension of the age of television. This changeover has dramatically and irreversibly shifted the content and meaning of public discourse, since two media so vastly different cannot accommodate the same ideas. As the influence of print wanes, the contents of politics, religion, education, anything else that comprises public business must change and be recast in terms that are more suitable to television. If all of this sounds suspicious, like Marshall McLuhan aphorism, the medium is the message. I will not disavow the association, although it is fashionable to do so among respectable scholars who were, if not from Moluccan, would today be mute. I met Maluthan 30 years ago when I was a graduate student, and he is an unknown English professor. I believed then, as I believe now, that he spoke of the traditions of Orwell and Huxley, that is, as a prophesier. And I remained steadfast to his teachings that the cleverest way to see through a culture is to tend to its tools for conversation. I might add that my interest in this point of view was first stirred by a prophet far more formidable than Malluern, more ancient than Plato, in studying the Bible as a young man. I found imitations of the idea that forms of media favor particular kinds of content and therefore are capable of taking command of a culture. I refer specifically to the Decalogue, the second commandment of which prohibits the Israelites from making concrete images of themselves or anything. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth below, or that is in the water beneath the earth. I wondered then, as so many others have, as to why the God of these people would have included instructions on how they were to symbolize or not symbolize their experience. It's a strange injunction to include as part of the ethical system unless its author assumed a connection between forms of human communication and the quality of a culture. We may hazard a guess that if people who are being asked to embrace the abstract universal deity would be rendered unfit to do so by the habit of drawing pictures or making statues or depleting their ideas in any concrete, iconic, graphic forms. The God of the Jews was to exist in the Word and through the Word, and unprecedentedly conceptions requiring the highest order of abstract thinking. Iconographically does become blasphemy, so that a new kind of God could enter a culture. People like ourselves who are in the process of converting their culture from word center to image center might profit by reflecting on this Mosaic injunction. But even if I am wrong in these conjectures, it is, I believe, a wise and particularly relevant supposition that the media of communication available to a culture are a dominant influence on the formation of the cultural intelligence and social preoccupations. Speech, of course, is the primary and indispensable medium. It made us human, keeps us human, and in fact defines what human means. This is not to say that if there were no other means of communication, all humans would find it equally convenient to speak about the same thing in the same way. We know enough about language to understand that variations in the structure of language will result in variations in what may be called worldview. How people think about time and space and about things and processes will be greatly influenced by the grammatic features of their language. We do not suppose, therefore, that all human minds are unanimous in understanding how the world is put together, but how much more divergence there is in a worldview among different cultures can be imagined when we consider the great number of variety of tools for conversation that go beyond speech. For although culture is a creation of speech, it's recreated anew by every medium of communication, from painting to hieroglyphs to the alphabet to television. Each medium, like language itself, makes possible a unique mode of discourse by providing a new orientation for expression, for sensibility, which of course is what Malluern meant in saying the medium is the message. His aphorism, however, is in need of amendment because it is, as it stands, it may lead one confuse a message with a metaphor. A message denotes a specific, concrete statement about the world, but the form of our media, including the symbols through which they permit conversations, do not make such statements. They are rather like metaphors working by unobstructable but powerful implications to enforce their special definition of reality. Whether we are experiencing the world through the lens of speech or the printed word or the television camera, our media metaphors classify the world for us, sequence it, frame it, enlarge it, reduce it, color it, argue a case for what the world is like. As Ernest Cassirer remarks, physical reality seems to recede in proportion as man's symbolic activities advances. Instead of dealing with the things themselves, man is in a sense constantly conversing with himself. He has so immolated himself to linguistic forms and artistic images and mythical symbols or religious rites that he cannot see or know anything except by the imposition of a artificial medium. What is peculiar about such impositions of media is that their role as directing what we will see or know is so rarely noticed. A person who reads a book or who watches television or who glances at his watch is not usually interested in how his mind is organized and controlled by these events. Still less in what ideas of the world is suggested by a book, television, or a watch. But there are men and women who have noticed these things, especially in our own times. Louis Mumford, spelled Mumford, for example, has been one of our great noticers. He is not the sort of man who looks at a clock merely to see what time it is. Not he lacks interest in the contents of clocks, which is of concern to everyone from moment to moment, but he is far more interested in how a clock creates the idea of moment to moment. He attends to the philosophy of clocks, to clocks as metaphors, about which our education has had little to say about clockmakers, nothing at all. The clock, Mumford had concluded, is a piece of power machinery whose product is seconds and minutes. In manufacturing such a product, the clock has the effect of disassociating time from human events and thus nourishes the belief in an independent world of mathematically measurable sequences. Moment to moment, it turns out, is not God's conception or nature. It is man's conversing with himself about and through a piece of machinery he created. In Mumford's great book, Techniques and Civilization, he shows how, beginning in the 14th century, the clock made us into timekeepers, and then time savers, and now time servers. Let me say that again. The clock made us into timekeepers, and then time savers, and now time servers. In the process, we have learned irrevocably towards the sun and the seasons, for in a world made up of seconds and minutes, the authority of nature is superseded. Indeed, as Mumford points out, with the invention of the clock, eternity ceased to serve as the measure and focus of human events, and thus, though few would have imagined the connection, the exorbitant ticking of the clock may have had more to do with the weakening of God's supremacy than all the treaties produced by the philosophers of the Enlightenment. That is to say, the clock introduced a new form of conversation between man and God, in which God appears to have been the loser. Perhaps Moses should have included another commandment: thou shalt not make mechanical representations of time. That the alphabet introduced a new form of conversation between man and man is by now a commonplace among scholars, to be able to see one's utterance rather than only to hear them in no small matter. Though our education once again has little to say about this, nonetheless it is clear that phonetically writing creates a new concept of knowledge as well as a new sense of intelligence. Of course, in the posterity, all of which Plato recognized at an early stage in the development of Texas, no man of intelligence. He wrote in his seventh letter, which will venture to explore his philosophical views in language, especially not in language that is unchangeable, which is true, that which is set down in written characters. This notwithstanding, he wrote voluminously and understood better than anyone else that the setting down of views in written characters would be the beginning of philosophy, not its end. Philosophy cannot exist without without criticism. And writing makes it possible and convenient to subject thought to a continuous and concentrated scrutiny. Writing freezes speech, and in so doing gives birth to the grammarian, the logical, the rhetoric, the historian, the scientist, all those who must hold language before them so that they can see what it means when it errs and where it is leading. Plato knew all this, which means that he knew that writing would bring about a perceptual revolution, a shift from the ear to the eye as an organ of language processing. Indeed, there is a legend that to encourage such a shift, Plato insisted that students study geometry before entering his academy. If true, it was a sound idea, for as the great literary critic Northrop Frye, F-R-Y-E, had remarked, the written word is far more powerful than simply a reminder. It recreates the past in the present and gives us not the familiar remembered thing, but the glittering intensity of the summed up hallucinations. All that Plato surmised about the consequences of writing is now well understood by anthropologists, especially those who have studied cultures in which speech is the only source of complex conversation. Anthropologists know that the written word, as Northrop Frye meant to suggest, is not merely an echo of a speaking voice. It is another kind of voice altogether, a conjurer trick of the first order. It must certainly have appeared that way to those who invented it, and that is why we should not be surprised that the Egyptian god Thoth, Thoth, who is alleged to have brought writing to the king Thamus, was also the god of magic. People like ourselves may see nothing wondrous in writing, but our anthropologists know how strange and magical it appears to a purely oral person or people. A conversation with no one and yet with everyone. What could be stranger than the silence one encounters when addressing a question to a text? What could be more metaphysical, puzzling than addressing an unseen audience as every writer of the book must do, and correcting oneself because one knows that an unknown reader will disapprove or misunderstand? I bring all of this up because what my book is all about is how our own tribe is undergoing a vast and trembling shift from the magic of writing to the magic of electronics. What I meant to point out here is that the introduction to culture of a technique such as writing or as a clock is not merely an extension of man's power to bind him, but a transformation of his way of thinking. And of course, of the content of his culture. And that is what I mean to say by calling a medium a metaphor. We are told in school quite correctly that a metaphor suggests what a thing is like by comparing it to something else, and by the power of its suggestion. It so fixes a conception in our minds that we cannot imagine the one thing without the other. Light is a wave, language a tree, God a wise and venerable man, the mind a dark cavern illuminated by knowledge. And if these metaphors no longer serve us, we must, in the nature of the matter, find others that will. Light is a particle, language a river. God is portraying, Russell proclaimed, a different equation, the mind, a garden that yearns to be cultivated. But our medium metaphors are not so explicit or so vivid as these, and they are far more complex. In understanding their metaphoric functions, we must take into account the symbolic forms of their information, the source of their information, the quality of their information, of the quantity and speed of their information, the context in which their information is experienced. Thus, it takes some digging to get at them, to grasp, for example, that a clock recreates time as an independent mathematician precise sequence. That writing recreates the mind as a tablet on which the experience is written, that the telegraph recreates news as a commodity. And yet such digging becomes easier if we start from the assumption that in every tool we create, an idea is embedded that goes beyond the function of the thing itself. It has been pointed out, for example, that the invention of eyeglasses in the 12th century not only made it possible to improve defective vision, but suggests the idea that human beings need not accept as final, that is, enter the endowment of nature or the ravages of time. Eyeglasses refute the belief that anatomy is destined by putting forward the idea that our bodies as well as our minds are improvable. I do not think it goes too far to say that there is a link between the invention of eyeglasses in the 12th century and the gene splitting research in the 20th. Even such an instrument as the microscope, hardly a tool of everyday use, had embedded within its quite astonishing idea, not about biology, but about psychology. By revealing a world hitherto hidden from view, the microscope suggests a possibility about the structure of the mind. If things are not what they seem, if microbes lurk unseen or on and under our skin, if the invisible controls the visible, then is it not possible that the ideas, and egos and superegos also lurk somewhere unseen? What else is psychoanalysis but a microscope of the mind? Where do our notions of mind come from if not from metaphors generated by our tools? What does it mean to say that someone has an IQ of 126? There are no numbers in people's heads. Intelligence does not have quantity, or magnitude, except as we believe that it does. And why do we believe that it does? Because we have tools that imply that this is what the mind is like. Indeed, our tools for thought suggest to us what our bodies are like. As when someone refers to our biological clock, when we talk of our genetic codes, or when we read someone's face like a book, or when our facial expressions telegraph our intentions. When Galileo remarked that the language of nature is written in mathematics, he meant it only as a metaphor. Nature itself does not speak. Neither do our minds or our bodies, or more to the point of this book, our bodies politic. Our conversations about nature and about ourselves are conducted in whatever language we find it possible and convenient to employ. We do not see nature or intelligence or human motivation or ideology as it is, but only as our languages are. And our languages are our medium. Our media are our metaphors, and our metaphors create the content of our culture. That's the end of chapter 1. We'll take a break here. We'll come to the next chapter here in a little bit. Okay? Thank you for being here. Again, this book is simply called Amusing Ourselves to Death, as Neil Postman tries to outline what has been going on and how our lives are passing by as death looms for all of us as we get older. And yet, we seem to be enormously caught up in what I call, or what they have called, sports, circuses, anything to entertain us, as though it's a way of not actually deep thinking at all anymore, or just wondering what my thoughts are, or why am I here, what is my purpose, and what happens to me when I pass, when I die. And those are deep questions, and you may not have any answers to those, but it seems as though people are caught up in the frivolous. They're not interested in knowing deeper things. And so that's really a sad remark about our society. So I hope that you glean some knowledge here and some wisdom. And again, I'll be back in a little bit and sharing another part of this particular book, because I feel it's very important for people to see what is really going on and how even families themselves today hardly don't even communicate anymore. I'm not married or anything of that nature, but I do observe, and the younger group is less and less verbal than ever before. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it also means something's wrong, that they're not able to communicate how they feel or what's going on within their lives. You see. Thank you, and we'll be back. All right, have a good day.